Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Mark Friedman. I'm the founder and co-CEO of CoGenerate. We're a nonprofit organization that's focused on bringing older and younger people together to solve problems, to bridge divides, and to co-create a better future for all generations. And that goal is at the heart of today's webinar, which is part of launching the CoGenerate Challenge to advance economic opportunity. The focus of this challenge is to enable older and younger people to come together to create a more prosperous and inclusive future for all generations. And the challenge has already started. We have opened applications for 8 $20,000 awards for social innovators focused on bringing the generations together to advance economic opportunity. And those winners, the people selected for those awards, will be part of a 6-month accelerator, all culminating in a showcase that features their solutions. I'm so grateful to the Aries Charitable Foundation for underwriting this challenge and for the whole idea of the challenge bringing generations together to solve our most pressing problems. Before introducing our wonderful speakers today, I just want to provide a minute or so of context. The United States today is one of the most age-diverse societies in human history, particularly when it comes to older and younger people. A quarter of the population is under 20, a quarter of the population is over 60, but there are very few opportunities for the generations to come together, not only to connect, but to collaborate on the problems that they are deeply committed to solving. And that's despite evidence that the assets of the generations fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And it's despite evidence that there's a deep pent-up demand in both groups among older and younger people to work on a set of issues that are shared priorities, and the belief on the part of both groups that no one generation can solve these problems alone. That was the result of a study we did with the University of Chicago last year. And the conclusion of that study, and this was enunciated by both older and younger people, it's simply too hard to come together to work on these problems despite the blend of talent and the deep desire to do so. Which brings us to the challenge and to the reason I'm so happy that David Shu and Sarita Gupta will be in conversation today on the importance and timeliness of bringing the generations together to advance economic opportunity. David Shu is the vice chair of our board. He is the leader of the Amidyar Network's Culture of Belonging portfolio. He's already had a storied career. He has a PhD from Princeton. He's been a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He's been a consultant with both Nation Builder and Proper Daily, and is the author of, to my mind, the single best argument for why we need to fight social isolation and come together and connect untethered. And David will be joined by the remarkable Sarita Gupta today. Sarita leads U.S. programs at the Ford Foundation. Previously, she led the Future of Work and Workers program at Ford. Today, our portfolio includes technology and society, civic engagement, ethnic justice, and other critical issues. For 20 years, she's been focused on improving the prospects of American workers all over the world, and their communities. She spent 2 decades at Jobs with Justice, helped lead Caring Across Generations, one of our favorite organizations, and we're so proud that she was one of the inaugural Encore Public Voices Fellows. So with that, I'll say thank you so much to David and Sarita and turn the conversation over to them.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's great to be here. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're calling in from around the world. Zoom rooms aren't real rooms, but I'm going to just ask everybody to let's sort of enter into the space together. If you want to just close your eyes, sort of take a few deep breaths. And I'm going to say a few words. And if you can just entertain me for a second, do with your body or in your mind whatever it wants to express when you hear the word. Connection. Equality. And dignity. The context for this webinar, building on what Mark said, we live in the most age-diverse moment in American history with a roughly equal distribution of people living across life stages. But it's also a society that has grown deeply segregated by age. On top of that, in today's reality, 42% of children born to parents in the lowest income bracket stay there as adults. The challenge of economic mobility also interacts with a racial wealth gap, where the median white household in the United States has 8 to 10 times the wealth of the median Black household. And disparities in both economic mobility and wealth tend to widen with age when you look at statistics for each part of the lifespan. Happily, in this webinar and via the CoGen Challenge to Advance Economic Opportunity, we're going to flip the script. Instead of being stuck staring at the problems, we're saying together that we see massive untapped opportunity for creating win-win scenarios for younger and older people. So the question is, what will it take to channel the abundant assets of an age-diverse America, an age-diverse workforce, towards an economy that works for the many and not just the few? And I have to say, this is a simultaneously thrilling question and a daunting one, because it requires a ton of imagination for a future that's different from today. And luckily, Sarita is here. Hi, Sarita. Welcome in.
Hello, it's great to be here with you, David.
Great to be with you. Now, everyone, Sarita has a great book that she co-authored with Erica Smiley of Jobs with Justice. There it is. It's called The Future We Need: Organizing for a Better Democracy in the 21st Century. And my favorite thing about this book is that there are these amazing illustrations and first-person stories woven through the book. And one of them is Sarita's own story. And there's one line from that that stood out to me from your story, Sarita. And you say, "We are always trying to make meaning of the world we live in." You say, I deeply believe that people should have the ability to shape their futures, and they should be able to govern every aspect of their lives. And so my first question to you, to get beyond Sarita of Ford Foundation to Sarita as human: jobs, workers, dignity, equality. Can you give us a snapshot or two of earlier experiences in your life which really put these words on your conscience and at the heart of your mission as a social justice leader?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, David. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity to reflect on some of my earlier experiences. And so really the primary one is that I grew up in Rochester, New York, which is known to some as Kodak City, since it was the headquarters of the Eastman Kodak Company. And during my childhood in the 80s, Kodak began downsizing for a number of reasons: aggressive competition in the business sector. They weren't able to really adjust to the shift to digital photography, lots of reasons why. But essentially, the company began laying off workers. And what I discovered is workers had very little voice or choice in the matter. And in fact, the company's employment in Rochester plummeted from more than 60,000 40 years ago to only about 4,000 today. So the impact of this was devastating. And David, I grew up one town over from Kodak Park, which was the industrial facility. So I was in a working class community where the majority of the kids I grew up with had family members who had worked at Kodak for generations. And most of my friends actually thought they would end up at Kodak, making decent money, getting benefits, having a middle-class life like their parents. But that was not to be. And unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that disappeared, new jobs that came in weren't comparable. So people ended up turning to low-wage service sector jobs with very little economic security. And so at a really young age, I started asking myself, how is this possible? How can families who have worked for generations at a company lose their jobs and their sense of security like this? And that's really when the seed was planted around the issues of workers, jobs, and dignity for me. And if we had more time, we could analyze it and talk about how this connects to my sense of belonging or othering that so many people in America experience around the divisions we see today. But I will leave you at that snapshot and just pivot to one other snapshot, which is my experience from my time organizing in Chicago. I helped seed the first day labor organizing project that was really born from discussions with faith leaders in specific communities throughout Chicago who shared that something new is happening for them. They couldn't provide the volume of shelter and food that people seemed to need. And so I worked with the Center for Urban Economic Development at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we did this research and found that over 100,000 Chicagoans were working day labor every day. This was in 1999, 2000. These were Black, white, Polish, and Latino immigrant workers without labor rights or protections. They were heavily exploited. And really, it was the first time for me that I saw this very invisible workforce. They became very visible to me. And it really centered the issues of equality and the importance of seeing dignity in all work. So those would be the two snapshots I would lift up that's shaped my passion and my commitment to this area of work.
Thank you, Sarita. And you know, today we've framed the your work at the foundation spans a ton of areas. Today's conversation we framed with a really simple equation: younger plus older equals economic opportunity. And I have to say, I haven't actually, as much as we work around these issues, I haven't had the chance to have this sort of like dedicated conversation about this. So I'm just curious, why does this conversation matter to you?
Yeah, well, there's two big reasons this matters to me. One is I have personally benefited from age-diverse workplaces, from mentorship across generations and interactions that really have created opportunities for me, right? I look back at my own career trajectory and I recognize the immense benefits of having older generations, younger generations, and being able to interact with them, and the spaces it opened up. I started my career trajectory actually in the student movement, running an organization that was student-run, student-led. It was called the U.S. Student Association. And most of us were 18 to 22-year-olds trying to run an organization representing student voices around access to higher ed issues. And what made that experience so powerful was this network of alumni who chose to play a role in really mentoring and supporting the leadership and development of leaders like myself. And so throughout my tenure at the Student Association and then at Jobs with Justice, I was mentored by people who were 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than me. And then later in my time at Jobs with Justice, frankly, I learned so much from younger generations of workers who came to work on these issues of economic justice and workers' rights. And in all of those interactions, I really treasured getting a variety of perspectives, a new and different ways to think about problems and to come up with solutions. I learned a lot of new skills. I was, through mentors, being positioned in meetings and frankly, getting supported in ways that I didn't even know to ask for at the time, but the age diversity made it possible, and that kind of mentorship and interactions made it possible. But I also learned when I was on the younger end of the spectrum age-wise, that I also, it wasn't a one-way relationship. I actually also really supported and helped older workers and leaders develop new perspectives and new approaches to the work and deeper analysis on issues of race and gender and ability and more. So just my own experience drives me to think about how can we create more opportunities for that kind of engagement and interaction to come up with solutions around our broader challenges of today. And then the second reason this really matters to me is because I do believe that when younger and older workers stand together and come together, we can really create immense change. I spent a great deal of time working in the labor movement as a close partner to the labor and workers' rights movement. And in every struggle I was involved with, I saw the power of older and younger workers coming together to demand more economic opportunity, for themselves, for their families, for their communities, whether it was workers at Walmart or at Smithfield pork processing plant or at Verizon or domestic workers or McDonald's workers. And in fact, right now we're watching it before our eyes with the UAW strike. If some of you may have caught this lovely piece in the New York Times about a father and son story, both on the picket lines at a Ford plant right now, but and how much work has changed between these two generations, and why then these two generations feel like they have to stand together and demand a different economic future. And you referenced, and Mark referenced in the beginning of this session, Caring Across Generations. And I'll just say, when Ijen and I started Caring Across Generations, we met with so many elders in this work who helped us understand the current landscape, but then co-designed with them a campaign and an effort that was purposefully multi-generational, because we knew it was going to take all our generations standing together to create the kind of transformative change that we need right now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that strikes me about your lens on our conversation today, that what can sometimes be siloed in philanthropy as sort of economy and work here, or care over here, or connection and belonging over here, and civic engagement. These things are pursued in an enmeshed, holistic way. So I'm just really struck by how embedded all of these topics are. Just before we dive in a little bit further into today's topic, a reminder to everybody in the audience. I see a few questions already trickling in. Please send in those questions, and we'll have time in about 20-25 minutes to dive into those. Sarita, as I was preparing for today, I was definitely having a few sensations. The first was just that this is like in some ways a big sprawling topic, because we are trying to put our hands around two crises that are intersecting. One is the crisis of economic inequality, right? And the crisis of deep social isolation and age segregation. Each one is complex on its own, and we've decided that there are opportunities that arise when we begin to look at their meeting place. And so whenever there's this kind of big topic and terrain, you need a compass. And the compass that we're talking about today, thanks to CoGenerate's leadership, really points towards cultivating connection, and specifically the interconnection of older and young people as a way forward, right? With this idea that these groups can do together and build a just economy in a way that no generation can do alone. So from your vantage as someone who has worked in community, advocacy, philanthropy, can you just give us a bit of a tour or a sense of, like, from your vantage, where are you seeing opportunity for older and younger generations to co-create a more beautiful future and an economy that works for all?
Just that, huh, David?
That's the one question I wanted to ask today.
Well, let me share some opportunities that I see. One is certainly the care economy. I can't stress enough that we have to transform the way we care in this country. And we're at an incredible generational moment right now, as we have a rapidly aging population, as we have baby boomers who are having children, millennials having children, sorry, and more and more of us, I'll put myself in this category, who are in the sandwich generation, who are really grappling with ways to ensure we're caring for elders in our lives, children in our lives, let alone ourselves and our partners. And so we have a really broken care system. And, I think the opportunity for generations to stand together right now and say, we don't want to pit childcare versus elder care, frankly, versus disability care versus paid leave, that actually what we want is a whole new system of care. And we want care to be valued in our society. And it's about interdependence. It's about independence. It's about support. It's about ensuring that everybody can live, age, and work with dignity, and that we need the workforce that's going to help us do that. And so there's so many different elements when you think about the care economy that presents enormous opportunities here. So that's one category. And I will say I'm really proud of the work that has happened with the care movement. I mean, when I think about the work, when Ijen and I started caring across generations 11 years ago, 12 years ago, no one was talking about the care economy, or very few were. And the fact that we're at a moment where, although we haven't won the full care agenda, the care economy is actually being talked about, is enormous strides. But that took, again, older and younger generations standing together, demanding change. The second I would lift up opportunity is really about this incredible, remarkable moment we're in right now, with federal investments in the creation of new jobs and the coming together of the green economy and the rebirth of the manufacturing sector. And I actually think the sort of new green manufacturing jobs is another opportunity and place where younger and older generations can come together and really put a vision out for what just work looks like, right? Like work that pays well, provides the supports, the benefits, et cetera, but also how we can transition our economy in the right way that allows us to be so much more climate conscious and to be carbon free, so what it will take will require imagination, like radical imagination, and that requires perspectives from different generations to help make that possible. And so I think there's a ton of opportunities there. And then the third opportunity, I think, is a big cultural opportunity that we have. As you referenced my book, David, Smiley and I had the privilege of interviewing so many workers for our book. And one of the through lines of all those interviews, especially among older workers, was them telling us the story of remembering a time when they used to work in order to live full lives. Like they could be civically engaged. They were involved with the PTAs and the public libraries and the parks councils. And, they were active. And that they've watched a transformation of work in a way that makes them feel like all they do is live to work now. And you pose that up against what really happened. The pandemic really brought about a cultural opening where so many people across the economy and across ages began to really question the role and purpose of work in their lives and how they are valued and seen in relationship to their work. And that's really why we see this, what I call a great awakening of workers and the kinds of mobilizations and actions we see today. But when you talk to mostly young workers today, what they will say is work is important to me, but it is not all that I want it to be. Work is not what I want to fully define who I am. I want work to be a piece of who I am, but I have all these other interests. And so when you think about those interviews and the conversations between older workers and younger workers, I think now more than ever, these generations can come together and really help shape a new culture of how we think about work, how we think about how we value work, but also what it means for people to live with the kind of economic security that they need, with the kind of sense of community and belonging, civic engagement, the kind of democracy and society we're trying to build together. I think there's enormous opportunity on the cultural front.
Mm. I love that. I mean, it sort of flies in the face of what we hear about most often, right? Which is sort of like people that are trying to like lift up, stories about younger people and older people sort of going at it in this kind of like zero-sum conflict where like, for me to win, you must sort of lose or something like this. And you're talking about something that's very different. It's a sense of almost sort of latent common ground that comes from these like deep aspirations for like the kind of lives we want to live and that we want future generations to live. So I think that's an amazing sort of prism onto what's possible when we sort of build those win-win opportunities. And you also named, just to reflect back, opportunities with continuing to make good on the care economy that we all want, as well as this incredible historic moment of federal investment in economic transformation that is going to touch so many parts of the United States, but perhaps most especially our rural regions in the United States, as well as our sort of post-industrial regions. Okay, quick plug, more questions in the chat. Now, okay, digging deep a little bit, there's been a lot said in recent years about some of the research of an economist and his collaborators, Raj Chetty, which says, and this body of research really says that there is a deep connection between human connectedness, social capital, and what really drives economic mobility in the United States. And so to sum it up for folks in the audience, all you really need to know from this research is growing up in a community connected across class lines improves kids' outcomes and gives them a better shot at rising out of poverty. What we're talking about, is age connectedness, which should have an especially powerful effect on economic mobility when younger people are connected to older people on higher parts of the income distribution. And so this like brings us right to something that I know many folks in our audience have been experienced in and have been pioneers in over many decades, which is intergenerational mentorship, which can take so many different forms and is continuing to evolve as our economy and culture evolves. And so I'm curious, you mentioned this a little bit in your own story. Are there models or cultural traditions of intergenerational mentorship that have just struck you as especially powerful, innovative, worth continuing to explore?
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. I mean, intergenerational mentorship, I credit wholeheartedly in terms of who I am today and where I am today. So I'm a huge believer in this. And so a few examples I would lift up that have been inspiring to me. One is actually the building within the building and construction trades unions. It's the apprenticeship models that we often hear about in the context of skilling and training people for jobs. But actually for women in the trades, mentorship and intergenerational networking and connections are a really key component of how you recruit, sustain, retain women in these non-traditional careers. And I think Chicago Women in the Trades in particular has had this incredible program and approach to this that I have seen. And actually one of my most favorite conferences in the world I ever went to was the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Women's Conference, and getting to hear and see the intergenerational connections were immense. So that's one model. A second one I would lift up is actually is Catalyst, which some of you may be aware of. It's a global nonprofit that has been really committed to supporting women who are, getting into, entering the C-suite or getting into leadership roles, and frankly around the world. And a lot of multinational corporations have really adopted some of the practices of Catalyst. But I think Catalyst is another example where, again, mentorship and connection and intergenerational networking has been so important in supporting women who can sometimes feel very isolated in leadership roles in corporate firms, right? A third one I would lift up is actually pretty new. It's a new one that I'm still learning, but I'm really inspired by, which is called Grow Your Own. It's Tennessee's teacher apprenticeship program, and it was really born from the results of the pandemic and the teacher shortages that were happening. Essentially, policymakers and educators in Tennessee realized that there are a lot of people in communities who care about education, who care about children, and some of them who are in support roles have not had the time, the resources, or the space to actually become teachers themselves, yet they're very interested in that. So how do you create an apprenticeship model that allows for that, to which, again, mentorship and networking becomes a really key component? And so in January of this year, in 2022, actually, of January, Tennessee pioneered a new way to develop teacher pipelines, and it's the first state to establish the first registered apprenticeship program for teaching in the country. And it's all built on-the-job learning, mentorship, support, and networking. So I think that's a program to be paying attention to and to see. And I know that the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association are all looking at this model to see what could be replicated and scaled up that opens up more opportunities for more and different people in this sector. And then lastly, because I come from the nonprofit sector, I feel like I should lift up a nonprofit example. Would be there was a terrific book written a few years ago called Working Across Generations, Defining the Future of Nonprofit Leadership. And some people may know Helen Kim, who's been a trainer with the Rockwood Institute. She co-authored this with Francis Conrather and Robbie Rodriguez. And they talk a lot about leadership transitions and nonprofits and generation at a time when a lot of generational shifts were happening, and the importance of that kind of intergenerational relationship building, partnership, and mentoring. And frankly, I'll just say from my own experience and having been a leader of a nonprofit of Jobs of Justice for so many years, one of my great gifts was the opportunity to get to mentor, learn with Erica Smiley, who then stepped into leadership and has taken Jobs of Justice to a whole new place. But that kind of intentional, like, people think leadership transitions, it's not just like a 2-week onboarding session. It's like, how do you actually build partnership and mentorship over time to set people up for success, especially women, people of color, gender diverse leaders. It's really, really important that we're being thoughtful and intentional about the kind of mentorship, networking, and support we give to set people up for success. And their book, I should say, just documents a lot of different examples of that. So I think it could be really a lot of good learning from that.
Amazing. So you've lifted up apprenticeship programs, sort of a networking based models, some kind of like pipeline models that are a little integrate many of these features. And then in the context of specific organizations, a kind of leadership development or co-leadership model. And I'm struck that many of these are just like, they're deeply embedded in existing industries, institutions. And it reminded me of a kind of framework that I think can be useful for some folks in our audience here. And I'm just going to be in the business of pumping different books today. But in Mark Friedman's book, How to Live Forever, the enduring power of connecting the generations, he talks about 3 types of innovators who are bringing generations together. Some are inventors who are dreaming up radical new ideas for how we can co-generate economic mobility. Some are integrators, right, who are really working within existing institutions, which might be age segregated, together for mutual benefit. And some are what he calls infiltrators, who are really just injecting older or younger people into settings where you might not have found them before. So just that, fodder for thinking about the full diverse range of possibilities for what not just intergenerational or intergenerational mentoring, but all kinds of innovations could look like. Now, you've spent a large part of your career building worker voice and power, and I couldn't let this webinar go by without trying to elicit some of your sort of thoughts on what has been called the hot labor summer, right? Where we see in my native Los Angeles, hospitality workers, entertainment workers, and across the country, auto workers organizing for fairness and dignity, and really building off of the long time work, perhaps sometimes less visible work of essential workers in our community. And you recently co-authored a piece which put this summer in context, I felt. And so can you just say a little bit, as we move maybe away from summer into autumn, winter, all the other seasons, how do we sort of sustain this pattern of younger and older workers linking arms to fight for a better future?
Yeah. Well, I think the easy answer is we're putting sweaters on or light jackets at this moment. No, but all kidding aside, I think we're going to just continue to see so much more collective action on the part of workers in this moment. And for all the reasons we've been talking about, the economy has not been working for far too many people for far too long. And as I referenced before, I think, at the start of the pandemic, I think we all were really scared about what was going to happen. I keep thinking about March 2020 and where we were and where I was, and the economic crisis and the high rates of unemployment and all that we were concerned about and continue to be, but understood recovery happened, but this amazing awakening happened of workers. So yeah, it's just a remarkable time. And I think the Writers Guild in your neck of the woods and in East and West were able to really come up with a contract and an agreement that was touching upon a very important issue. So when we talk about what should we be paying attention to around future mobilizations, it really is the impact on artificial intelligence on work and impact of new technologies. And it's one of the big issues for SAG-AFTRA with all the actors being out. It is a theme within UAW strikes. It's a theme in a lot of different parts of the economy right now, but really the role of technology in older industries and in newer industries. And so I think this is an area where, again, the voices and the thinking and the opportunity for younger and older workers to come together and really create the road or the pathway for what the rules need to be around new technologies in workplaces and how humans can be centered in those conversations, I think are important. I think a second thing I'm paying a lot of attention to is the continuing conversation about gig workers. During the pandemic, many gig workers were left out of recovery efforts like unemployment insurance because they're not employees. And a lot of groups fought to make exceptions to all of that. But the question is, what is our long-term plan with workers who either work temporary or do freelance work, or are independent contractors that work in informal settings or on demand basis? And so I think it's going to be really powerful. We're already seeing younger and older workers who are standing together to demand access to labor and social protections and to create new ones. I got asked once by a trustee of the Ford Foundation when we were talking about future of workers, they asked, what keeps you up at night? And for me, what keeps me up at night is if we're not careful, we can repeat history and set up a whole new generation of labor policies and rights that actually are exclusionary versus inclusionary. And so the opportunity we have right now is, in fact, to be able to create a next generation of inclusive labor and social policies that really meet workers where they are today.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some things I'm paying attention to around these struggles right now.
Thank you. And I see Marcy has joined us, which means it's just about time to move to audience questions. I'm struck, Sarita, in your answer, and just in our time together today, you've probably raised easily a dozen different industries, different sectors, different types of work that we may not always necessarily think about immediately when we talk about building a more inclusive economy that works for all. So I just think that's when we sort of see what comes through with this this challenge, right, to think really expansively about not just the age-diverse economy as that shows up in our offices, but also in the informal sector, gig workers. There's certainly a lot of innovation here for employers who are trying to make the most of an age-diverse workforce, for technologists who have a major outsized impact on our economy across the lifespan. And so just, there's like kind of a kaleidoscope here that you've lifted up. So thank you. Now to transition us into the Q&A, could you just, knowing that in our audience, we have a mix of innovators from every generation. They're storytellers, advocates, researchers, policy wonks, funders, business leaders, community leaders. Do you have any sort of words of wisdom or inspiration that you want to leave with our folks today?
Yeah, I'll just say we're just in, again, a remarkable moment of huge transformations. And I think we have an opportunity to shape a future for us and for generations to come. And so, the importance of seizing this moment, and it really does require, and I think Mark said this about imagination, I would just say it requires radical imagination, to think big, to think better. And so it leaves me with, I guess, one saying and phrase, which is, I'm taking from a former civil rights leader, the late Dr. Vincent Harding, when I engaged him around how he sustained himself in the work of justice. He said, he shared a West African proverb with me, which was, I am a citizen of a world not yet born. And I think if we just think about that for a moment, we are all citizens of a world not yet born. I think if we can just keep our eyes on the prize and let our radical imaginations run wild right now, push beyond the limitations, I think we can, in fact, transform our society and our economy in a way that truly allows us to create opportunity for all. So that's what I leave you with.
I am a citizen of a world not yet born. Thank you, Sarita. Marcy?
Hi. Okay, I'm going to surface just a few questions, and I'm trying to find ones that either were expressed multiple times so we know there's interest. There are two that I'm going to lump together because they relate to gender, although in different ways. The first one is, I'm vaguely familiar with the building trades apprenticeship model and some of the ways that gender molds the experience, not only as an apprentice, but over the careers of women. How can that inform other sectors? And then the second one is, I wonder how intergenerational mentoring in the heal professions, teaching, nursing, etc., could get more men attracted to those fields and staying in them. This is Courtney Martin relating it to Richard Reeves' new book on boys and men. So I think those questions seem likely to be paired. So, and Sarita, this feels very much in your space.
Okay, well, there is a lot that can be learned from the building trades model, and especially what we, again, have seen women in these non-traditional career pathways help create. And I keep harping on that because I think it's really important and different. And it's women of color who are really paving new pathways forward on this. And so there's a lot of different ways. Actually, I've been a part of networks and spaces where that model is being shared. So for example, a long time ago, domestic workers who were trying to figure out apprenticeship and training models actually were able to learn from building trades models of how do you create these kinds of training and programs and support models. It's definitely being shared across sectors now. The Department of Labor, the Women's Bureau, does a great amount of work to try to share these types of models. So those would be some of the resources of where I would go to try to learn more. Definitely, I'm sure Chicago Women in the Trades would kill me, but go talk to the Chicago Women in the Trades because they've done amazing, immense work on this and often are very happy to talk to other sectors about their lessons learned and how to really develop these kinds of programs to be effective. And again, going back to opportunities, we have the opportunity right now with all the new job creation to do this and do it right. And then the second question, Marcy, you're going to have to repeat it again. It's the how to get more men and boys in these fields, right? Okay, just want to make sure. Well, one key component of it is that we value these jobs. And really what I mean by that is about culturally understanding that these are truly important jobs that are fundamental to our society. Who cares for our children, who educates our children, who cares for our loved ones. All of that work for years and generations has been undervalued and seen as so-called women's work. And so one is we have to really transform culturally how we value and see this kind of work and the role of care in our lives, period. That I think then opens up a lot of opportunity to talk about gender diversity in these career pathways, because if we can make the jobs, better paid jobs with more supports, with the kinds of benefits that we need, I think we will attract a much more diverse population of people who are interested in this work. So there's so much we can do, but I do think some of it really fundamentally starts from culture, let alone then the practices and the norms that we create.
Yeah, Sarita, I just have to say, I think one thing that came out of the pandemic that I think can be very useful on that front is the phrase essential work.
Yes.
I mean, right, when you have work that is deemed essential, that has to, we now have to do the work of elevating and making better jobs, those that are essential.
Right.
So
it can't just be in name. It has to be then in practice. That's right.
There's a question that I really liked, and I'm actually going to ask Duncan to come off camera to answer this one, which is, can you please share CoGenerate success stories and vision for the future? My concern is that Mark, David, and Sarita, and I'll add Marcy, are part of the sandwich generation. Same for the writer here. Where are the younger CoGenerate representatives, and where do you all see the benefits in getting involved in this kind of cogeneration work? Duncan.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. Hi, I'm Duncan. I'm 29 years old, so that counts as younger in this context. I mean, I will say, if you're looking for great cogeneration stories, there are so many examples. I'm just thinking of stories that we've told recently about organizations like Sages and Seekers, which bring older people into classrooms for cross-generational mentorship. Foster Grandparents is a program we've worked with in our Generations Serving Together program that does a really innovative 3 generations model where they're bringing older generations with people in the middle as well as young kids to do a program all about emotional literacy. And then one that's a little more focused on economic opportunity. There are various home sharing programs around the country, including one of our innovation fellows, Carrie Buck, who started an organization called something in Orange County, Homeless Intervention Services, and they have a home sharing model where older people with a spare room have the opportunity to give that to a younger person for lower rent than they might have to pay in a comparable area. And I think that's a really great way to fight housing insecurity. And just in terms of the question, it was something like, where do I see the benefits of joining with older people? I mean, I see it everywhere I look. You know, I just recently worked really closely with Marcy and continuing to work with her on a project that we're doing about cogeneration in the workplace, and the way that our skills and talents match up works so well to kind of push that to the next level. And, you know, in my own life, kind of my origin story was working on a political campaign and working with much older volunteers who meant so much to me. And, you know, fighting for that common cause really helped push that relationship, push both of us to the next level. So I can say for me, I think I have a lot of excitement about working with older generations. And when I talk to people my age, I think there's a lot of excitement as well, and also sometimes surprise that this idea is not obvious, right? We are really pushing something that I think people are going to be surprised and delighted to find out about. So thanks for that question. I can go back off camera.
Thanks, Duncan. All right, I'm going to pair two questions. I think we have time for one more question before some final announcement. And I'm going to lump these two questions together, and I think David or Sarita can jump on this, but this one speaks very closely to something I've been digging into a lot, which is how our views about work are kind of evolving generationally. And it really touches on what Sarita talked about working to live versus living to work. And I think there is a definite conversation that I would say is driven by younger generations who are pushing back against what they saw their parents or grandparents even gave up in the name of work. So I guess the question is, where do we see co-generational opportunities for the generations to be in exchange, maybe learning from each other with that tension in mind? Anything coming up? Because I think there's some really good seeds planting here for some applicants to this program.
Where do we see opportunities given the tensions of how, like, we want to work, but we also want to live, like
exactly.
that kind of, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to, and Sarita, please chime in, but I did want to lift up that CoGenerate has on its website. Sort of, there was a study done with the University of Chicago that really was asking people across the lifespan, you know, where, you know, do you want to co-create and sort of work across generations? And it was interesting to me to see a few different areas that I just regard as sort of relatively recently emerging sectors or parts of the economy, or parts of the economy that have long existed but are just evolving now. And the areas were areas like care and mental health, climate, and, you know, a lot of the conversation recently about generative artificial intelligence is really affecting, and younger people will lead this conversation of, it sort of changes the context for how we even are able to imagine what work looks like. But both the benefits and the harms of those technologies are going to be unevenly distributed across our society. And so I think that also raises questions of how can we bring younger and older people into the conversation about the ways in which artificial intelligence will be used to serve our highest aspirations, and not the other way around. So I'll get off that soapbox, but Sarita, anything that you would add?
No, David, that's exactly right. I agree that it's the emergent parts of our economy in the way that you described. AI, as I had said before as well, are really important arenas. But I also think there's something about the moment we're in around the kinds of divisions that we see in society writ large, and the opportunity to create more communities of belonging, which I know, David, you've done so much incredible work on. But what I find in our work is people are hungry to be in community with each other. And so how to think about workplaces as one arena of many others in people's lives where people can connect at that level, and have a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and how that then impacts the way that people can function in the rest of society. I mean, when you look at back in the day, and I study labor, right? So like unions were described as, real laboratories of democracy for this reason. It was the idea that people of really different backgrounds would come together and debate issues and have time together and work together and build together, but they were also then civically engaged throughout society. And I think there's a real interest among young workers and older workers, young people, older people in our society, that we're preserving our society and our democracy, or we're strengthening it. And I think there's something there for us to explore, the linkage of those experiences and opportunities across work and the rest of our lives. So it's a little abstract, but I think there's a lot that can be explored within that context.
Wow. On that note, Sarita, that is, there's a lot of threads for us to pull together, and I see so much potential for this initiative we're kicking off. And I just want to thank Sarita and David, but quickly bring in my colleagues, Christina, who wants to share a few closing announcements. So I'm going to say goodbye and leave it to her.
Well, thank you so much, David and Sarita, for, like David, you said, flipping the script and helping us think through how we can focus on solutions rather than problems around economic opportunity. And so I would like to invite the audience to please take a few moments to fill out a short poll. And as we're filling that out, I have a couple of things to share with you. The CoGen Challenge to Advance Economic Opportunity is open. So if you were inspired by today's conversations, opportunities, ideas, please apply. The solutions can be around caregiving, support, job training, healthcare, housing, quality education, and so much more. The applications will close on October 16th. And we have an information webinar coming up on October 4th at 9 a.m. Pacific time and 12 p.m. Eastern time. And we also have a recording of our info session from yesterday on our website. And we'll drop that link in the chat for you. So please stay tuned for our next virtual event with Scott Shigioka, the author of Seek, How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. We're looking forward to seeing you again soon and reading your applications for the CoGen Challenge. Thank you again to David, Sarita, Mark, Marcy, and everybody who made this event possible. And for all of the people tuning in today, we're so glad that you were able to join us. And until next time, bye-bye.